Anyway, now we're recording.
Meaning it's being recorded.
Right.
Okay.
So who wants to decompress first?
I mean, I guess I kind of started
Yeah, you
because
did.
I was like, because I discovered that I'm addicted to stress. So that's lovely.
Do you think that started well before MSW?
Yeah, absolutely. That was my modus operandi for surviving my environment for like as long as I can remember. It's being stressed out and then learning how to like deal with it. Essentially, like, because I went to like private schools. In private schools, they always had that like ridiculously high standard of academia because they had something to prove with all the money that they were getting.
Mm,
So it just became an issue of like, oh, well, you're always going to be stressed out because we are going to put so much pressure on you and so many assignments on you that if you're not constantly operating at a level of stress, you're not going to be able to produce your best work. And that's just how I thought the world worked forever, you
yeah.
know?
Yep.
So now here I am in graduate school where the stakes are similar, right? In that you have to perform and succeed not only in the capacity of your schoolwork, but also in your internship, because all of this directly relates to the types of jobs you will be able to get when you graduate.
Your
In
ability.
other words,
Right.
yeah.
So do you think what's the difference between high school and this MSW program in terms of like that culture of performance and your ability to do the work now will be telling if you're able to do the work later in another job in a professional setting.
Yeah, I think that's basically it. Essentially, this is far more, I really want to think of it as like a, what are those schools called where they train you for a very specific job?
Vocational.
Like a trade school?
Vocational.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
a vocational school? Yeah. It's kind of that like that because social work is a very like it's very broad, but it's also very specific because you're going to be put in a very like it's a very like broad role, but it's a very like you know the parameters of what your role are. Do you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. So,
So that yeah.
but no, go ahead, go ahead.
No, it's just like they're training you to be a social worker because the social workers like the school of social work is accredited, right? And they all have very specific competencies and values that we have to adhere to in order to be like in order to get our masters, in order to get like our licensure if we want that. Like it's all very like codified and I guess yeah, it's all just very codified and very like you have to follow these specific steps to be this type of person. So I guess that really kind of fit into my strata of like, oh, this is just like school. This is just like high school where I had to constantly operate under the assumption that there are very high standards for what I need to do, and if I don't meet them, then I fail, and failure is not an option.
Do you think that there's been like more support systems up in yeah, have there been more support systems within the school of social work within our department as opposed to high school? I mean, I know they're different times and they're probably different type of support systems, right? And it's a
Mm.
different phase of your life as well, right? So yeah, like
Yeah, I think the main difference is I'm much more open to asking for support in this environment because I just feel like the teachers are safer and the administrations are safer, and that's just my own experience, right? Like I think that I operate under the assumption that like I'm gonna get this support that I need or the services that I need just because of the way that I talk, the way that I look, like it's never something, it's never a question for me that I can kind of get what I need
mm,
necessarily from most places if I ask. The only times I ever felt like I wasn't getting what I needed was when I was surrounded by people who were just like affluent. Like they were just like really like just like they operated under a different like world
mm,
where they weren't stressed about like their like their parents, their families, their homes, like nothing. Like they were just wealthy and it showed. And being in that type of environment where I'm always like comparing myself to people who are quote unquote doing better than me,
yep.
like because of how wealthy they are, I retreated. Like in high school, that was my thing. I retreated and I didn't ask for help. Whereas here, I feel like everything is a little bit more equalized because everyone in social work is really trying to do the same thing. Like we all kind of have the same core values of like what we want to do and how we want to operate in the world and in our environments.
Mm.
What about
And
those
that,
admin at the VA or other big organizations?
see, that's the thing, right? It's like those organizations, they try to support but not necessarily, right? And for me, it's like it just becomes a part of navigating systems, and the way that I navigate systems is finessing them. And that's, I feel like that's what social work is. It's learning how to finesse these systems to make sure your needs are getting met and the needs of like the people that you're serving are getting met. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I mean, yeah, to a certain degree. Like, yeah, what about you, Noah? What are your experiences been in terms of getting what you need and feeling supported? Now you did a this is your second master's that you're pursuing, right?
Mm,
Or that you did a
first one that I'll first one that I'll complete with a master's degree.
okay. So but you started another one.
I've been in two other post whatever graduate programs.
Okay. And if are what in your educational experience in your educational pathway, yeah, where does this
Well,
lie?
everything changed with when it went virtual. I mean, I at that point like I stopped even asking for support, like
Okay.
because I didn't see like I'm a person that probably utilizes what I can see and what's around me, and so virtual like it's hard for me to see what's there. I'm thinking of like registering, right? Like I fucked up registering for my for next spring, but like I wouldn't have done that if we were at school. Like I would have popped into Jerry's office and be like, "How does this look?"
Okay. So proxy.
Or shared it with classmates. Like all this stuff. Like I just I'm not used to, so I don't know how to take advantage of it, or it's more uncomfortable to reach out,
Sure.
not in person. Um, Man, but that's a tough question. Like I I've felt super challenged since COVID started. Different different highs and lows.
Yeah.
And I'd say generally like my support usually comes from my community, and I feel like we kind of lost our community as a cohort. I'm really grateful that we've kept our group chat going. That's hella helpful to me.
Yeah.
And conversations and a couple meetups. But just like having people that are in similar situations and have shared experiences to like bounce ideas off of, or just like catch what they're saying and be like, oh, that makes me think about something I haven't thought of. Like
Sure.
those spaces don't exist anymore, which is sad to me.
Yeah. So proximity is important to you. You need to be close to people, and the transition from uh, in-person learning to virtual was it was a challenge because you didn't necessarily see the door open to someone's office. So the reason why I was asking, and when Sergio was talking, I was just thinking, you know, it seemed like you had agency and some more autonomy, Sergio, and maybe less. I don't know. I guess there was no one was. Did you feel like anyone was like coming to meet you? Because I think we talk about this idea in social work of meeting clients where we're at, and
No.
yeah, I don't
And
know.
it was interesting because when I was listening to Noah talk, I was just like, yeah, I guess I do miss the proximity, and I do learn better in classrooms. I always have, right? And I love the classroom because it was a safe space that was kind of, for me, it was easy for me to detach from all the stuff that was going on for me in my life by being in a classroom and focusing on like structured time and structured content, and like the the dynamics of like teacher and student, like that was always really safe for me, and I do kind of miss it. But a part of me, and I think I'm realizing that it's kind of sad, is that like I'm just so used to not needing to ask for help.
Mm,
Like even when I need help, I
yeah,
just learned to like not ask for it.
sure.
So when we went to online learning, and it just became very like, it just became very like transactional, like log on, here's the content, leave. Like that's what it felt to me. Like I didn't really feel that proximity like with my cohort anymore, because when we weren't physically like near each other, but also I just felt like emotionally we weren't in the same space as each other anymore.
Mhm.
Because there's something to be said about sharing a physical space, because as long while you're sharing a physical space, you're also sharing like emotional energy, like an emotional space, right?
Totally.
But when we're all in different places and we're all just connecting virtually, like that emotional space can't connect with each other that well, you know,
Yeah.
because we're all just so far apart. And yeah, I guess for me it was just kind of like, I don't know, I just decided that, I mean, I would ask for help if I needed it, but I also just knew that like I wasn't going to get a whole lot of it,
Sure.
because everyone was kind of running around with like their head cut off, you know.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Like this is new for faculty and staff as well, right? They're
Hmm.
trying to figure out yeah, there's no, I don't think there's any blame. I'm just wondering, right, for a student who comes in, whether it's virtual or in person, and who doesn't have their voice, right? Maybe similar, who doesn't really know how to ask for help, right? How do we better support that student, right? Like, how is that a collective of faculty and staff and students, or is it more of the faculty? Is it, the director, the dean? What, whose is it, right? Because I'm not sure. That's why I'm asking the question. Like,
For me, I
I
think
got an idea.
it's. Oh, go ahead. Go speak.
Just one.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
So I learned at a pretty young age when I shifted from private school to public high school,
mhm,
and in that shift, I learned to like advocate for myself, and like not manage, navigate a bureaucracy, like a really large administration, right, rather than a really small administration at a private school.
yep,
Um, and I don't take that for granted. And so I think not everyone has, like, my mom pushed me, to make sure I was like advocating for myself.
yep,
And there were things that I saw and experienced that I was like, this isn't right, or this could be better. Like, let me see what I can do. And so, not to take that for granted, that is a part of like growing up, but obviously, there is teaching involved. And so I do think that can be either a summer course coming into grad school, a seminar, for folks who haven't had it, or for everybody, as a refresher on how to navigate like a really large institution.
yeah,
San Francisco State isn't even that large, but it's a lot larger than most people's, I think, high schools or colleges,
sure,
potentially. And it's confusing, right? You're in grad studies, you're not in undergrad. So there's like, I think, different politics and relationships and organizational structures.
sure,
And so that would be I think that would be nice. I could have benefited from that, to learn more about like like, what do I go for Jerry for? And what can Jerry not do? Like, and who's the next person I go to when it's not Jerry? Like, right? Like, why did I only learn about Maham when it came to pushing the ATC form? Like, where was she when we were having issues with social work program, right? Like, is she somebody that we should have brought into the conversation?
sure,
So I think that would be really helpful, because I think not everybody has either had that or been like encouraged to like flex that agency in asking for support. And not, I think, beyond support, also just like that customer relationship that we've talked about a few times, like how to, if you want something or if you're not getting it, like how can you go out and get it, or advocate for it.
yeah. I mean, that's tough. I think that's one of the more difficult parts of grad school is the hows, or like getting the explanation of why, right, or what is. So we're talking about, advocate for yourself. I've heard that 1,000 times. Now I kind of have a basic understanding. Just I've created my own understanding of what advocate for yourself means. I don't know, the way I'm hearing it, it sounds sometimes like there is a list of ways to like best practices on how to advocate for yourself. And advocate is a really, kind of blanket statement. And I think, maybe there's some space within the program early on in our program where that is defined, right? Like,
And it mirrors the experience that we should be providing to our clients as well,
right.
which is really important and special.
We use that word like far too often, but never actually we've never discussed it, right? Discussed like what that means to advocate for yourself or for someone else. And so, yeah, that would be helpful for me. And yeah, there's just like a lot of, I think there's a lot of, what is it? Assumptions that everyone is coming in. Sergio's talked about this before. There's a lot of assumptions about where people are coming into the program, right? You're in grad school and that means blank. I'm like, well, what does that mean? Right? Everyone has had a different experience, right? So, I would say early on, it's, talking, maybe it's in one of our, what is that, a seminar class or whatever the, what was that class? I think 855.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
They kind of go over like the.
Jerry taught it for our class. I think Erica's teaching it now. But yeah, those are things where those are topics of conversation, right? And I think that's a great place to actually start developing relationships, right? Just I felt like it was very we talk, you listen. You know what I mean? And I'm like, oh God, this is reminding me of why I don't like school. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because there are certain things, right, that we need to kind of hear first in terms of like administrative stuff, like resources, like library stuff, like all these different things that are just kind of info dumps. And like that's fine. Like that's just like a part of any program, right?
Sure.
But I'm also really looking at like I just feel like it's the system's response to provide that space for us. In this case, like the School of Social Work, to really kind of like, okay, so everyone has an assumption of what graduate school is. Everyone has an assumption of what social work is. We're going to show you what San Francisco State believes social work is and what San Francisco State believes advocacy is, right? We're going to show you how we think.
Yeah.
And I just felt like there wasn't a whole lot of that. It was more standardized than I would have liked. And I understand that like there's accreditation, there's all these different political processes, but there's a way to just incorporate that into your curriculum of just like, how do we think critically about, how we think, because I feel like once we get to the meat of that, once we get to an understanding of like how everyone thinks, then we can come together and figure out and have like a combined, like a collective understanding of what social work means and what we want out of like our careers,
Yeah.
I don't think there's enough room in 3-hour classes for that.
But there's room in a semester.
Yeah, there's definitely room in a semester for sure.
I'm kidding. 3-hour classes, man. You could spend at least half of that stuff talking about other stuff.
I think it was longer than that first class that we had. Jerry was longer than 3 hours, wasn't it?
It was divided into 2 sections, or like 2 days, I think. So it was like 2 3-hour classes, I think.
6 hours,
right?
a lot of. I think 6 hours is a lot of time. I think 6 hours is a lot of time to. Again, we're not. It's. I think it's reevaluating what material is in that class, right? I don't think I need to listen to the financial aid person talk about basic overview of financial aid. I think most people understand basic overview of where the office is. I mean, I know it's important. I know that part, you should have those conversations. But I would have loved, I was talking to a friend of mine who does workshops specifically for college students and finances, right? Like, talk to me about like real life application. Talk to me about what are some of the hurdles, like literally go through it day to day. Oh, remember that time where you were, remember that time you were super hungry and you just kept eating because you kept going to the, whatever store. Like, yeah, if you're taking loans out or whatever, you're losing money. Okay, these are things that you need to think of. Oh, how does paying back a loan work, right? How does the principal interest work? Those are all parts of being a graduate student. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, unless you are having those conversations within your home, or that's something that you're just kind of like privy to. Like, well, where else are you going to find out about it? Like, obviously, there's a long list of stuff that we could mention. But I do think it is part of that process, right? It's being prepared. Like, financial literacy is definitely part of it. Learning how to advocate, defining what advocating means. Um, you know, what you might, not even what you might, when this does happen, right? Like, when this does happen, what's your response going to be? What can your response be? Like, emotional, physical response. I think we've all gone through those moments before where we've touched on a subject in class or whether working with clients that it hit something and it like legit made you, like go somewhere and no, well, take care of yourself. Well, what the fuck does that mean?
Right. And I think that's just a bigger problem of like the system's response to what social workers need. Is just like, well, you just have to take better care of yourself. It's like, no, like it's not just the responsibility of the individual worker to take care of themselves.
Sure.
If they need to decompress the stress constantly of their work environment because they're not being taken care of in their work, then there has to be something going on in the actual work environment that you're creating.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's accountability.
Oh, don't tell.
Exactly, right? Like, what are we really what are we really saying by constantly sort of pushing aside the collective needs of a workforce by just saying, oh, it's just something you have to be better at taking care of for yourself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that's a social work problem. Like, even in the internships that I've been in, I've literally seen social workers kill themselves day in and day out just to meet quotas and deadlines and what have you, and like work pace, right?
Yeah.
And it's like there is no self-care going on there because there's no room for it. The system is designed in a way that there's no room for that self-care to flourish or to develop because things have to be done. People have to be serviced, right? And it's the same thing in the School of Social Work too. It's like, well, you got to get the papers done. You got to get all this stuff done. And if you don't get it done, then that's on you, right?
Yeah.
But and I feel like that's the area where I feel with a lot of professors, it was just kind of like, it was like, what, like you're creating a lot of stress, and like you're having to kind of backpedal and like push back the deadlines or like drop assignments or like reevaluate your curriculum like mid semester. It's like, why wasn't this like a thought when you were creating it? Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't know, I don't want to be like really harsh on the professors, but I'm not trying to be. It's just like, there's clearly a way that this is going to work for everyone.
Yeah.
And you realize it like halfway through the semester. Like, why, what makes it so hard to figure it out in the beginning? You know?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think there can be a blanket approach to teaching. And I know this was a really unique semester just because of being quarantined and isolated. I know everyone, and this is where I say the responsibility on instructors and staff in the department. And I recognize that it's really difficult for them as well. But if you recognize that difficulty in your own life, how are you understanding that that's a difficulty for your students? Could you imagine what that's like to be in the student's place, right? Because I mean, every teacher and every staff member has at one point been in the graduate program, so they understand how tough it might be. But I think it's just fascinating that I've mentioned it before. Like, I've talked to both of you before over this excuse me, over this period of time, and my own learning of trying to understand like how to be an effective teacher, right? Because that's something I want to do in the future. I've talked to you, I've mentioned to you both, like in reading and learning about depression in students, and even during this time, like suicide, right? Like those are real things. And I would want to ask either one of you, did you really hear any like clear information or clear instructions? Hey, y'all should seek out, I think it's a great idea that y'all seek out some support systems, not just specifically with like suicide, but did anyone tell you at any point, hey, you know what? I recognize that this is really difficult, and these are some support services. These are some things that you might be going through right now. I can't imagine what it's like to be in your shoes right now. Do you remember anyone?
I heard that a couple times. Not obviously word for word, but more about like people really encouraging us to get a therapist early on. I remember hearing that message, that both because of how difficult social work program is, like that you're, working through a lot of kind of self-identity stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And also as you get into the practice and even in the internship, that you're dealing with some really intense things, and some intense things might come up for you.
Yep.
And so I know I heard it from at least a handful of times in different spaces and places at school.
You're saying in the beginning, that was when
throughout.
so you said you heard it throughout. Okay. And that's in one-on-one conversations or in classrooms?
No, I feel like that came up in class.
Okay.
I don't know if you two remember that, but
man, it's hard for me.
That message of just recommending to get a therapist definitely came up. And a couple of times then people talked about what resources were available through San Francisco State or through other stuff.
Sure. I remember seeing that in like our Facebook groups. I remember some of our cohort, putting in resources in the Facebook group about, therapy or counseling sessions. So I thought that was really important. I don't remember. I mean, I remember early conversations about getting a therapist, but other than that, I don't know about, other than that, I don't know about anything. I can't remember. But again, my 2020 has been a blur. So I'm not saying it didn't happen. But I do think that this goes back to this idea of expectations. There's an expectation that you know how to do all these things. Right? You know what I mean? I think we have a hard time recognizing that everyone is coming in, like Sergio said, everyone's coming in at a different point, right? Like I came into the program at 36, right? So I've had a little bit more life experience than someone coming in at 23, right? At 23 I've said this time and time again when I've talked about this program, like I'm thoroughly impressed with our cohort just based off of somebody who's looked like there's no way I would have ever been able to do this at 22 or 23, right? And there's no chance I was mature enough to even get there to have these type of like questioning moments and reflection. And I don't think I was ready for that. So to do that, and then I also recognize at 22, was I thinking about getting a therapist at 22? No, not at all. No chance. So that's why I'm saying, like, yes, I heard those early stages, get a therapist. Well, I already had a therapist before I got to college, right before I got into the program. So I was like, oh, okay, yeah, no shit, right? Like, I'm with it. If you could take a step, well, both of you had therapists before, right?
Yeah, I had one for about 6 months.
Okay.
Before I started, yeah.
Okay. And
again, I'd worked with therapists previously, but I was not seeing one before.
But you had a therapeutic experience in terms of like in a clinical setting.
Yeah.
Right. So you were we were all exposed to that, and I don't know if that's the case for every student, right? So you knew what the process was, but if somebody coming in was not familiar and then is just kind of thrown into the fire, right, which is part of grad school, well, yeah, And then, you should go find a therapist. Uh, we don't do that with clients. We definitely don't do that with clients. So, yeah, I'm like, oh, yeah, I don't know if that's a fair process, right? It's kind of the same with in this work that I'm doing with identifying collegiate student athletes as at risk in vulnerable populations, right? I think it aside from collegiate student athletes, co- college students, just students, are definitely at risk.
Absolutely.
Graduate students included. So, but again, I don't think we're treated that way. I don't think that that we're breaking. There's room for improvement. How about that?
Yeah, I think people, there is this myth, right, that if you go to college, you're going to get a good job. You're going to be able to live a comfortable life, and that's it. It's golden. But what we realized in the past couple of years is that that myth, that is a myth. It no longer exists. It might have existed like 50 years ago
Sure.
when college was like $600, but now college is a substantial life investment.
Yeah.
Like you will be paying this debt for a good majority of your life.
Mm-hmm.
You have to there's so much pressure to make sure that the career you're choosing in college, that you're paying X amount of tuition for, that's going to end up in the hundreds, like no, like what is it, like $50,000, $100,000 worth of debt,
Mm-hmm.
is going to pay off.
Yeah.
Right, and that's stressful. Even more so in a graduate program where you already have the debt potentially of an undergrad program, but now you're adding on more debt because you want to make sure that you're in the best possible position for like your career.
Yeah.
Right, and that's stressful.
Yeah.
And considering like how our generation is so indebted by student loans, like we're in a very unique situation, and that makes us uniquely vulnerable in ways that our parents or our grandparents weren't, compared to like the job market.
Yeah.
And so there's this added pressure of like, we have to succeed, we have to thrive, we have to make sure that this counts, and that's stressful.
Yeah. Totally. Couldn't have said it better. So, was there a moment that you can recall in this last semester, specifically, since we, one one more to go? Was there a moment where you felt more vulnerable than others? I mean, you can, yeah,
Oh yeah, like when that thing with Sonia happened.
talk more about that.
I just felt like, and we've talked about this ad nauseum, but for me, it just felt like I was just, I felt like I was the only one feeling what I was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I felt like that was because, again, we weren't sharing the same emotional space, because it's intrinsic, for me, it's intrinsically tied to our physical space.
Yep.
And it just felt very lonely. And loneliness is what makes me feel the most vulnerable. And I was being, and that, on top of already feeling vulnerable by like what had happened in that classroom, with that kind of white supremacist overtone of like academia and not being listened to or heard to, and being like lectured that this is how it is, on a subject that is primarily about people of color, and a struggle that is experienced by people of color, being told to us by like a queer white woman.
Yeah.
Like it kind of summarized like a lot of what I experienced in social work up until this point, where it's like people of color, despite being a large consumer of social services, don't really have a say at the table. It's mostly white women, it's mostly white people, it's white administrators, white CEOs, white presidents, white whatever the fuck goes on in these organizations.
Yep.
It's mostly white people, it's also white women. So for me, feeling that vulnerability, I just felt alone.
Yeah.
I just felt really, and I felt like it felt like I was the only one experiencing that range of emotions. And that might be just my own emotional vulnerability in that moment, but it is strange because I wasn't held, and I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
I had to basically advocate and be like, you fucked up. I need you to say that you fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
You're stupid. And, I got her to say that, right? But it was just lonely. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I'm just looking. I want to make sure that when, like, I think it's easy to provide an overview of emotions and feelings, but like not get into like the nitty gritty of it. And a situation like that, you gave context, right? We had a lecturer come in, or a guest lecturer come in, and I think she was talking about her CE experience, her culminating experience project, and how it was facilitating anti-racist and oppressive practices at the VA, which you're currently interning at, Sergio.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a queer white woman, and it was just really, yeah. I remember I think I left class. Matter of fact, and I left maybe virtually. I left class. But yeah, I think you're no doubt like the most vocal by far person in the class, and so you have
Mm-hmm.
no problem venting your frustration. But I remember hearing you, and I could tell it was like a very isolating moment, right? I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna say, I don't want to say anything because I don't really want to. Like it's frustrating for me.
Sure.
But yeah, I was just like, I don't want,
Yeah.
what? This is the same old bullshit. But I was really happy that you said something. Um, but those moments are the things that I think people don't think about, right? Like those aren't the moments that they're telling you about in the brochure at San Francisco State. Those are not the moments that anyone's really talking to you about in your seminar class or in that whatever class that we were just talking about.
Right.
And so those are the things that I'm like, hey, this could come up. And how are you going to react? How are you going to move forward? Like that can be extremely hindering in your educational journey, right? Like, fuck this shit. I'm not putting any effort into this. I'm still dealing with the same old bullshit. And
Yeah. And I feel like that's what happened, right? Is that as we were kind of going through the process of like, say our first semester even, we were faced with roadblocks in the form of very old hat professors.
Mhm.
And what they reminded us was that, oh, this is school. I know how to navigate school. I know how to navigate this professor.
Mhm.
So I'm just going to default to navigating this professor, navigating this curriculum, and moving on to do what I want to do because clearly this isn't what I want. So
Yeah.
I'm just going to get it over with as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And the problem is with those experiences is that it literally poisons you to even bother trying with the rest of the program or with exploring vulnerability because it's just like, why bother?
Yeah.
And
Why
it creates
bother
a
being
shitty
vulnerable?
foundation for social work practice.
Yeah. Yeah. I
If
mean,
that's if our introduction to it and our learning is tainted with that, and I know I've said it before, but like to me, if I had to boil anything down or just say like one letdown or like my biggest critique is the seminar space.
mhm.
And the teachers we've had for seminar have been like short of terrible, I think, in modeling processing. And I feel like that's what the seminar is for. And that's what they pitch it as, right? To like process both what goes on in the internship and also what happens in our program. And so if we had that space, Joe, you were talking about like this blanket educational philosophy or approach.
Yep.
Like if that space had a blanket approach, which I think it does, they just can't seem to do it, which baffles me. Because it's about like listening and like probing and like, like it's really basic shit that I think we've learned and yet they can't even model it. Like, yes, uncomfortable things are going to come up. And like, no, I don't think an orientation can prepare us to like navigate those things. But I think a weekly seminar class that models that can, right?
Sure.
So if you have that teacher really utilizing that space and showing us like how magical it can be,
Yeah.
not only is it a gift to us as practitioners, but it's a gift to us to make this experience meaningful and learn from our experiences in internship and that happen in class and around the education process.
Sure. was there a moment that you can think of, Noah? I mean, I think you have the most, I think you've had the most feelings around uh, the processing process processing
Yeah.
uh, within this seminar. So, is there a moment that you can go back to within the semester where, yeah, you felt more vulnerable than others? Was this semester just kind of, same as usual?
Definitely not the same as usual. I hit like my COVID bottom, and hopefully it was my bottom. But like I'd say a month or so into the semester, like I'd maintained a level of positivity,
Mm.
or pretty like optimistic outcome, and like that. I don't know what triggered it, but that came crashing down, and then I felt pretty like hopeless, unmotivated.
Yeah.
So those motivation was definitely my biggest struggle this semester.
Mm.
And it's definitely hit a bottom like towards the middle of the semester, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that isolation was definitely one of those things that I was feeling. And I think it was a span of like a month. It was like a month and a half. But what really kind of a really vulnerable position was having to email Dr. Lee and let her know I wasn't going to be doing an assignment because I think that was when Ahmaud Arbery had been shot and killed. And then not too long after that, we had Breonna Taylor and well, Ahmaud Arbery had been killed in, I think like February. But my timing is a little off. But there were these consecutive kind of national events. I would go into say, I actually argue that these were global events, right? Because what we've seen is a global unification from the death specifically of George Floyd. And I couldn't come to class, like I couldn't pay attention. And this assignment made no sense. And I remember I had to email Dr. Lee and tell her, I was like, you know what? I don't know if this is ever. I don't. Yeah, like part of me feeling more human is saying I'm not doing. Like I can't do this. Like I don't see what this has to do with what's happening right now in the country, what's happening right now in the world. If we're talking about social work, right?
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't do it, and I don't know if I openly discussed it. But similarly, I mean, we had I got a distaste, and it made me remember my distaste for education, or not my distaste, my what is the word? My disappointment with education. Going back to being, an elementary school student or a high school student, what does this shit have to do with me? Someone teaching me that they don't look like me, they don't understand the complexity that I'm coming from, right? And we're gonna move past what's happening in the world, but we need to focus on this education, right? We need to focus on the plan. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, when those things happen, I was gonna say, in our first year, I recognized, oh, I'm here we go, I'm back to it. We were in whatever that damn class was, and I recognized that there were some teachers who were not ready to have open conversations about race. And I was like, well, I'm fucked because I'm in a social work program and we can't openly talk about race.
Right.
And not that I'm looking for a professor, to just sit there and lecture, but who knows how to facilitate a conversation, who knows how to encourage a conversation. And once that put a terrible taste in my mouth. I was like, oh, that's what we're. Oh, okay, cool. All right, I'll figure out my own way of doing this. Now I recognize that's also not a healthy thing because what I did then was suppress how I was feeling. I suppressed that first year. I suppressed it. Both of you recognized it too. You called me out for it. You were like, "Oh yeah, dude. I didn't know you were in class." I'd be like, "Yeah, stop talking." I was like, "I'm trying to figure out how." That was another process. How am I going to get the most out of this program if I can't come in and have an open discussion, which is why I came to this program. Like that's what I was looking
How exactly? How are you? Yeah, how are you going to have this open experience if they're not willing to meet you where you're at?
for. Sure. And so that continued, and I recognized that. And so when all those, when those murders were taking place, I was like, well, let me start by just emailing, like being very clear with a professor and saying, I can't do this because I don't, one, emotionally, I'm not there. Emotionally, like, not to say I was scared. I was definitely very sad, extremely sad to see this, um, to see this type of violence against Black people and communities of color continue. But it's like we all saw it. You know what I mean? Like visually, we saw these things happen, with the exception of like Breonna Taylor, but and Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd. I just couldn't understand for the life of me how we didn't have conversation, in-depth conversation, an application of that within a social work program. We legitimately skipped over what the fuck was going on in the country, in the world.
As they say, the silence was deafening, right?
Mm-hmm.
I
I don't think it was deafening in this case. I think it was very loud.
like
It was very clear what was being
exactly.
told to us.
like we're not talking about
Right.
that because we're not ready to talk about that. Because to talk about that would mean that we're gonna have to address our own, or everyone's gonna have to address their shit about something,
And that's
and
right,
that's
and that's
not
the
ready.
issue.
Right.
Exactly. Because that's really what, and I feel like that's what people need to realize about this type of work, is that a huge part of it is addressing your own shit and working through your own shit. Because if you don't, you're going to be one of those like social workers with a swivel for a head, like running around trying to do everything for everyone all the time, because you're working with your problems, not working through them. You know what I mean?
Sure. So,
So
oh, go ahead.
yeah,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, I was just going to say like, so when it's apparent, when we can see it in our professors, that it's just like, it's very surface level. It's not, they're afraid to go deeper for whatever reason.
Hmm.
It lets us know like, oh, okay, this isn't really a safe space anymore.
Yeah.
This isn't open or collaborative. We're just trying to get through it.
Right.
And that doesn't encourage anything. It just encourages us to get through it, to just move on through the program and do what we have to do and then move on.
Yeah. If it wasn't for our, I would say for me, if it wasn't for our conversations, right, our consistent communication and our reflection, I don't know where I would have went. I'm sure, I guess I would have found something, just because that's, like I would have found a way to process, maybe, hopefully. I don't know. I don't know anyone else who was going through, and that's the purpose of the cohort, right? The purpose of the cohort is so that you can have that type of relationship with people, right?
It's interesting too, because
So,
I just think, sorry, were you going to say something?
that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. No, I was just going to say, there are people in our cohort who I think are not really ready to have that conversation either.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
so that's always been my biggest observation too. It's just like the way that we all approach the situations that we're faced with is different, and that was really apparent with I keep referring back to it, but that incident with Sonia and the white woman, was that everyone had a different type of response, and
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't unified, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and like, I don't like, I'm not trying to make assumptions, but for me it was like a lot of them were just like, okay, we just got to get over it, we just got to get through it, like we got to move on. You know what I mean? Like there was nobody wanting to linger or reflect on it more than necessary.
Mm.
Or some people justifying it like, oh, it was a misunderstanding, and like almost being like, oh, it was a misunderstanding, it wasn't really like as bad as we wanted to make it out to be, right? And it's just one of those things where I'm thinking like, a lot of people aren't really ready to have those conversations or willing to. And is it the responsibility of the program to open up those doors regardless of where we are, and try to bring us into this collective experience of trying to figure it out?
Mm.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh. Mhm.
So Joe, here's a curveball for you. What would it look like, or what might it have looked like,
Mhm.
if we took the onus off of the professors,
Mhm.
or gave up on them, however we might see it,
You think
and
I've given up on professors?
give up on them?
I don't think I've given up on professors.
No. I'm not saying you've given up. I'm saying,
Oh.
what if, and instead focused on the cohort and the community as the source of of what we want to do. So like, instead of struggling with like telling with like a teacher not talking about something, like what if you pocketed that and we just look at the cohort and like and express our needs to the cohort rather than to the teachers? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Extremely complex. The same way we were talking about meeting students, where are students coming in as very vocal social justice organizers? No, not necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think we're talking about something much more complex than just like, okay, students, go organize. You know what I mean? I agree that there should be more opportunities that are presented. Right. I think that's what we're looking for. I think that's what would be helpful in I'm not looking for professors to save the day. I'm looking for professors to be very vocal about how to, what are the where are the opportunities, right? I understand things about creating your own space, but if we're in a program, I would assume there's got to be, that's some of their responsibility. This is
I
how,
don't disagree.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree. But
And
I'm just saying, let's like for a second, can we imagine a world where that was to go down, however it goes down, and we don't have control over that, and they are just, or no, rather they are a part of the collective, right? That the classroom is 20 students and one teacher, and that makes 21 people in the classroom.
yep.
And what if we viewed it as that? That they are just one person and they might not be keen on the conversation, but two other people in the room will be, right?
Well, I think the infrastructure is already there. We've talked about this shit before. I don't know what I think there's two groups. There's a council. There's a MSW council, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another group. There's another
honor society or
honor
whatever.
society.
Yeah.
This is no knock against the people in the honor society, because I don't know who told that. I don't know what that process looks like. I don't know who the faculty advisor for those programs are. But there's infrastructure already in place for students to work collaboratively with teachers. The stuff's already in place.
Yeah, but those groups are for very specific types of responsibilities, I think.
Sure. And I'm not saying those two, but what I'm saying is the infrastructure in terms of being a part of a group is there, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
MSW Council, well, what are they a student? I don't know. That maybe that's my fault as maybe that's my responsibility as a student to know what these programs or what these um, groups are there for, right? I mean,
Do you remember
Yeah.
that moment? Do you two remember that moment in seminar first semester? Something happened, and the three of us stayed behind and talked to the professor for a little while.
yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I remember.
To me, I think that was the model of what being a student in this program can look like, as far as taking responsibility for creating the class culture that we want, and not expecting the teacher to create it for us, and pointing a direction to the type of conversations that we want to have, no matter if they're ready to have them or comfortable having them or not.
Exactly. And I think the issue that we had in retrospect was we expected the professor to have that conversation, to facilitate it well. and they clearly weren't ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was an issue that I feel it was an issue outside of her scope of understanding.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what we should have done is just been like, hey, we're gonna have this conversation. We are gonna start this conversation. We're gonna have it with our peers, peer to peer.
Yep.
And you're gonna be there to just be there to facilitate it so it doesn't get ugly. Like that's it. You're like the referee, basically. Like I feel like that's a better utilization of the classroom dynamic than what it currently is, this kind of hierarchical structure. Because I think what you're proposing, Noah, is like a non-hierarchical formatting and restructuring of the classroom setting, which I think is great, which I think is like, especially in a graduate school program where like our development as adults is like we've already reached a certain point in our lives, in our adulthood, where we're like we have the foundations of who we are and what we want to be. Having that space be like an opportunity for us to develop newer skills around collaboration and collective like learning, I feel like that's the ideal. You know what I'm saying? Whereas like if you're a kid in a classroom, hierarchical teaching makes so much more sense because you're a child. Like you don't have like a solid enough understanding of the world and of what you need to know to keep going, right? But as an adult, going into a graduate school program of your own volition, I just feel like they need to take that more into account when it comes to like non-hierarchical learning, because I feel like this is the perfect environment to do that.
Yep, I totally agree. I mean, we have to take into account there are people who've been, us included, I don't want to exclude us from the group, but we've been indoctrinated into a style of learning, right? Like that doesn't go away, right? They're legit. We've been told this is how you're supposed to learn, you know. And when I think about this, my question is, where is the line between? I think Jerry's mentioned this, and I've liked this concept of cultural taxation. Well, how much are you going to ask specifically when we see these issues that arise with issues that are predominantly affected folks of color? Well, how many times do we need to keep asking folks of color, oh, why don't you come up with the plan? Why don't you figure out how to move forward? And we talk about this again, this is part of social work, but if we're asking that, and I think it's a fine line though, right? Because I do think that as students, right, we absolutely have to participate. But when it becomes a social work program, and majority of our class are folks of color, yeah, you know, people are like, y'all been doing this shit for for years in my class. I continue to do this. You know, we see this in other, not just social work, not just in education and professional environments. Let's go hire. We're going to start a diversity inclusion program. Let's
Mm-hmm.
find let's go find a queer person. Let's go find a Latinx person. Let's go find these. Okay, you should run this. And they might not know the first thing about running a strategic diversity and inclusion program. But
It's so interesting because the powers that be are just like, well, we don't know either, and we don't want to be held. We don't want to be held accountable for it.
Yeah.
So we're just going to put a brown person here, a queer person here, so they can take the heat if something goes wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that it's funny because I was reading this thing recently. This one of Google's like first like what was it, like race and equity, like diversity officer or whatever, recently came out about how she had to do exactly that. She had to basically create everything from the ground up, like work through the institutional racism of Google, constantly have to feel belittled, berated, all this shit.
Yep.
And finally and then eventually even get fired for it. So it just goes to show that like we're always doing this shit in spaces. Like we're always having to carve our own niche because the powers that be are just like, well, I don't know what the fuck to do, you know?
Yeah.
And that makes me also think of the necessity for us to come out of this program with the ability to facilitate conversations. Let's say we're doing a group, and obviously recognizing our racial identity or whatever salient identities are in relation to the content of a group and our group members. And so like if we can't see this conversation being facilitated, then how the fuck are we supposed to facilitate it? And I'd also go and say, I think a neat thing about having these conversations in this social work space is also to give us some shared language or language if we don't have it around tough conversations. So even if folks of color, and I don't totally feel comfortable saying this as a white person, but I'll give it a shot, have experienced these things time and time again in the classroom, it doesn't mean that they have the language to express their like feelings around it, right?
Yeah, totally.
So I think like again, processing, the idea of processing is like such a nice model to create a brave space to have these conversations.
Yeah, if you're, and I would appreciate staff, faculty, whoever, being honest. If they know that they're not able to facilitate the conversation, model this theme of collaboration and go find somebody who can. I don't think that's very difficult. Again, in theory, not difficult. That's where I think it's more difficult with this traditional model of education, specifically the educator, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I can do it. Like, I'm the teacher. Like, well, not necessarily. I mean, and I don't see anything wrong with going to get somebody who would be able to have that conversation. Now, that goes back to the work, Sergio. That goes back to being honest with yourself. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do this very well, right?
Right. And if you're being paid to do it, you're less inclined to be like, I don't know how to do it.
Sure. Like, it was like like if I don't have any experience on running a group and somebody said, hey, you know what, I got this substance abuse group that I'd like you to run. I'm going to ask Sergio, you want to co-facilitate this group? Because I've never done this before, but I would love to participate to build upon my skill. And you have experience doing this.
Right.
So,
but then it becomes like a logistic issue of like, how do we, like, I just feel like, I mean, if Jerry was here, he would say it's a logistic issue with like the school and like academia and like the School of Social Work and graduate studies. You know, I just feel like there's a lot of barriers to kind of having the non-hierarchical structure when the institution is so entrenched in it, you know?
I mean, shit, we had a guest speaker come in from Taiwan during the middle of.
I mean, that's true.
I mean, I'm saying, I'm by no means am I saying that you're wrong. What I'm saying is, in the middle of one of the highest or most sensitive times in racial fucking tension, we had someone from Taiwan come in and talk about social work in Taiwan.
Right.
If that opportunity is there, then I think this goes back to who do you know and how aware are you? Same situation with that class where where we had a self-proclaimed white woman, not self-proclaimed white woman, she was a white woman, but self-proclaimed facilitator and expert on anti-oppressist and anti-racist practices.
Right. And I mean that could be a read on like our professors just don't really have those expansive circles. Do you know what I'm saying?
Or aren't willing to go get them. Even if you don't, this is, to me, if I want to go find someone who specializes in something, especially with specifically within the alumni, like, come on, like that, you didn't try. You didn't try.
I agree. and all those listservs they're a part of, like for school-based social work, like or whatever, like they and interdepartmental collaboration, like certain professors got a better circle for that, so go ask them, right?
There's an ethnic studies program, a very well-known ethnic studies program. There's a counseling program. There's a
Right. And then it's I think it's also a symptom of just like higher academia is just so siloed into departments and specialties, right? So like the Department of Social Work may not interact with the Department of Psychology, who doesn't interact with the Department of Ethnic Studies. Like everything in higher education is siloed and nobody really collaborates outside of each other because it's not
there's
prioritized.
Exactly. There's like a competition there and who's going to get what. Jerry talks about trying to grow the program and what the complications are there. I had originally, when I created this vision and started proposing the idea to San Francisco State, they were all for it. And then COVID hit and they're like, yeah, we can't support that right now. Well, I just sent an email, circling back, letting them know, like, hey, I've put the work, like I've been building upon this, and here's a program overview. Take this into consideration. How do we have some conversation about moving forward? Oh, this is great. I want to connect you. So. Oh yeah, by the way, we had 2 graduate counseling interns this past fall. I'm sorry. You had 2 counselors. I'm not upset. I'm not upset that like, oh, you forgot about me or something like that. But I'm saying, well, okay, well, how is there? Okay, how do you? Oh, you should meet the counseling interns. Fucking right, I should meet the counseling interns, right? Like, of course, we should be collaborating as much as possible, right? In identifying the need for student athletes, I had to go around and look at the campus and be like, well, how come we only have 2 opportunities to intern on campus? Guardian Scholars, which we do have an intern, which there is an intern for in our class, and what's the other one? Project Rebound, which was for formerly incarcerated folks to get into school who had 0 MSW interns.
What kind of interns do they have?
No clue. I tried to, that was a process that I said, oh, I would love to help kind of develop this. And then when I recognized through going through, again, this is the troubling part, right? As we talk about adding things on your plate, I had to tell myself, I can't do this. I can't do this on top of everything else I have going on. Mm-hmm. I'm just not able to do it. Mm-hmm. I was waiting on Noah. But yeah, either way, collaboration is essential, and I think we're preached that all the time. Like,
right, it just needs to be modeled and like implemented, and it's not. And I think COVID makes it even harder to like even consider this stuff because the school's basically on fire, the world's on fire, and everyone doesn't really know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But I still want to push us though to think about how we think to collaborate with our cohort. I'm not like, I think our cohort is collaborative. We have the Facebook page that gets utilized pretty well. We obviously, different people are in different group chats and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But I do think like as with all things, there's room to like grow and experiment, and I'd be curious to see if there is a void in something that we would like to get out of this next semester. Like, how could we alternatively look to our cohort rather than a teacher or Jerry or the school?
When you say look to, what do you mean?
If there is a void in conversation, content, activity,
don't we already do that? I mean, like we do that like in our Facebook groups and in our like just in our in our communications with each other. Like I guess I'm just curious, like what more are you looking for specifically?
So one of my, which I've already expressed in this session, one of my pet peeves on the program is like coming away with a lack of experience around like around facilitation with a difficult conversation or processing. I don't think I've seen that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? A year and a half into social work school, I don't think I've even seen that model, which is terrible.
Sure.
But so like instead of asking a teacher to do that, like, instead of first asking a teacher to do that, like what if I look to the group to build some momentum for that experience? Like rather than me sitting here and wishing I would have got something out of the program, or rather me trying to tell a professor of ours, like, please, please, I really want this to happen, but it's not going to happen. Like look to the group to see if we can create either momentum or create that space without a teacher.
Well, I think we're doing it thus far. Sergio and I officially, and you and two other students unofficially, and doing an independent study in the spring, right?
Yeah.
And that's, going back to that moment that you had, Sergio, where you were extremely vocal and your dismay of how that was like that situation was handled. I went to the drawing board and was like, okay, well, where do I go from here? And that's where I came up with the independent study. That's where I was thinking. I was like, okay, well, I got to do something. Like I'm tired. Like I'm tired for Sergio to having to be the next one to be vocal. I'm tired for him. And regardless of that was a great opportunity to be vocal, and I'm glad you took advantage of it. And I was looking for what's the next step. There has to be an actionable item after this. We can't continue. You know what I mean? It's like, yes, I think one of the things that I've heard more about is this idea of conversation. You know what I mean? Now that we're like with schools, business, whatever, around race. Oh, we're ready to have this conversation. We've been having the conversation. What are the actionable steps? What, you know what I mean? Like, where is the investment and time and resources into like making some significant change? And I'm not necessarily saying significant change than tomorrow, but where's the movement? Where is the movement? So that's why I say the independent study, which I hope in the future is talked about a little bit more. Like I don't remember that necessarily being talked about when we first got to the program. But if there is something really cool about the independent study, from Sergio and our conversation with Jerry, it is very exploratory. You take it where you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And there is room for consideration within the program. And that's what I'm super pumped about, because I'm like, oh, this could legit be implemented at some time. This could be taken seriously to faculty and professors, lecturers.
Mm-hmm.
But we need those avenues. We need those.
No, I agree. It really is just a matter of like letting people know that you can explore it and you can push barriers in a way that still is within line of like an accredited school of social work or whatever needs to be done. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Because I see that side too. It's just like we want to make sure that we are showing people like a standardized way of understanding things in a way that we know is evidence-based and works, right?
Yeah. So I don't want to go. I feel like we do this every one of our conversations. We're like, yeah, we need to do this, and this, and we get to these points. But action steps. For the sake of time and my own curiosity, I've been struggling with kind of like weaning off of work. Like semester is over, and I'm still I recognize that I find like my curiosity levels are at all time high, and I really
Mhm.
just I want to learn, and I know that my success is based off of my ability to like keep on. Not necessarily. I don't like to use it work because like a class is different. I'm ecstatic class is over, but now
Mhm.
this is a different part, and I'm having a hard time kind of discerning like, is this healthy or is this kind of, are you getting into this routine that people talk about, like you have to give yourself a break? And I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to go off a feeling. I'm trying like I'm like I feel good, but this in itself lets you know how crazy this shit is. You're like, you
Mhm.
have to check in with yourself, and sometimes you might be like, yo, I don't know how I feel. I don't.
That's
That's a
real,
whole
and I
funny
think
question. I like that.
and I think that's just I think that's where we're at right now as a country,
Yeah,
as people literally living through a pandemic, going to school through a pandemic. It's like we are so stretched thin on like every possible facet of our lives.
yeah,
And like how do we find the space to take care of ourselves and have these bigger conversations? And I think that's the problem, is just that we are not we a lot of people just don't have the space for it anymore. Like whereas like we would have been able to maybe have some traction if this was like a normal school year, with the pandemic and all the problems that have been compounded because of the pandemic and because of isolation and lack of resources and all of these different things. Where's the space to do that and also be a sane human being that takes care of themselves, you know?
yeah.
Joe, I identify with that. I think I'm reading more for pleasure now than ever, but like it's within like the social work realm.
Yeah.
I'm journaling more than ever.
Mm-hmm.
I'm using therapy to talk about some social work stuff.
Yep.
So I agree. Like my mind is lit. It was not for school,
Mm.
so I am grateful to be done with school. But I don't see that as bad. I don't see that as like a break. I feel like I'm grateful to have found something that I am interested in,
Yep.
and I'm excited to like spend my time now or my life, or whatever, until I get bored of it, like digging and diving and being curious. I don't see that as like detrimental to my wellness or mental health.
Yeah.
I
No.
think
Good.
no, I think the only way that it becomes detrimental is the urgency to do something immediately that's going to create an immediate kind of result, because
Yeah.
it's like you said, this is a lifelong curiosity and a lifelong kind of, I don't even think you said hobby, but it is kind of like a hobby of like
Yeah.
figuring out like what the next steps are, because the next steps aren't necessarily actionable in very clear ways, right? It's like there's action steps to take before the action steps. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like it has to start off really small, and it has to start off in a way that's not going to produce an immediate kind of relief, right? And just keeping in mind of that when we're kind of looking at these bigger topics of like anti-racism work, like deconstructing the hierarchy of academia, like there is no clear-cut answer, and we can be frustrated about that, but it can't consume us.
Thank you, Noah.
Thank you for you've you've clearly right. Don't blow your load.
Thank you. Thank you,
Just don't blow your load.
Noah.
Save
So,
your juices.
what are y'all? I guess it's hard. I mean, what are your? We got one semester left, and I don't know if you've been able to like frame that or conceptualize that. Um, I I just had. I think yesterday was the first time that I really like even that thought blossomed. Like there was like a little bit of like, oh shit, okay, damn, I only have one more semester. But it wasn't like a panic. I wasn't like, oh damn, I have one semester left. I need to like do something. I was like, damn, okay, this is gonna be over in a semester. Okay, okay, damn. I haven't gone anywhere from there because I'm I'm starting to apply to jobs and getting recommendation letters. So yeah, where are y'all at in terms of, have y'all processed that at all, that there's only one semester left? What do you, I mean, it's so soon, and like I almost hate to ask the question because I mean, there hasn't, you haven't
Mhm.
even had a week, like a whole week to fucking just be like, woo, done with that one. But are there any expectations, or have you had any like visions or feelings, whatever, about next semester, or just being finished, almost like legitimately months away from graduating?
I had the like foresight or whatever when this program started that it was going to be over before we knew it. Like
Mm,
2 years did not seem like a sufficient amount of time for me
mm,
for like exploring a new career at least. Um, so it's not shocking that it's here. It's always kind of been in my vision. But I'm hoping I want to solidify some relationships
mm,
with some other folks.
mm,
Obviously, continue this relationship with the two of you.
mm.
Solidify some others because I know how quickly relationships fall off, especially being off social media. So I want to solidify some other ones of folks who I do want to like maintain communication with. And what was the other thing? Oh, and I think really focus on work, like doing some informationals with different folks, seeing what's possible out there. Um, those are my two like aspirations.
What about you, Sergio?
Honestly, what comes to mind is really just getting my CE done.
Mm,
You know, just getting that project done because I feel like the reason that I'm doing the project that I'm doing is to get a better, like, to figure out my foundational framework for the anti-racist work that I want to be doing in the future.
mm.
You know,
Yep.
whether or not like I do that like through community organizing or whatever, I just want to know what I'm about, and I think that I can do it through this through the process of completing this project. So that the project is loaded for me, and I want to make sure that that gets done because it's meaningful for me. And the other thing is just I just want to start locking down on a job, just because. Yeah, I'm just I don't know. Money's always been an issue for me historically, like just coming from where I come from, and it's really important that I'm able to stabilize myself for the future. And given kind of all the chaos that exists right now, I just want to make sure that I am taking care of myself.
Yeah.
So that's my goal, really. It's figuring myself out and taking care of myself through those two things.
Yeah.
Joe, you got any thoughts for yourself?
Yeah. I mean, the thought that's been dominating my consciousness has been throwing a party. I want a party at the end of this, and that's hard to. I don't know what that looks like coming out of the next 5 months of political unrest and of the policies and procedures, the culture that comes out of this time of COVID, and but I just yeah, in terms of that's what's been dominating my mind. It's like let me throw a fucking party. I gotta have one. Just, there's got to be
Period.
there's got to be a celebration. Like,
No, there literally has to be. Like, we've been through far too much
or,
in the past in the past 2 years for us to not celebrate it in a meaningful way. You know,
and
just
then
how do you do it safely?
right. Well, oh, no, I've never been good at those things. I like to let people do what they do. But in terms of the school, I've been trying to figure out. I've been trying to figure out what type of legacy I want to leave. What am I going to leave for the program? And I guess that ties back into this independent study and maybe a little bit of my internship. I do think that if there's is there something that I can do to improve the next class, or maybe the first year's experience in their last year, like that's kind of been my mindset. And I think conversations like recorded conversations like this can be extremely helpful. And the more I think about it, the more I want to do this or encourage other people to do it in our cohort. Like, shit, this should be in your like quite honestly, this should
Summer reading.
this are before you even step foot in the program.
Yeah,
Before
that's
you,
what I'm saying.
as you think about exploring conversation, oh, you know what you need to do? You need to go on, San Francisco State's MSW Facebook, and watch, or you know what I mean? Like, I just want to make it a better experience, right? I think it is about create, like, this isn't like I don't want anybody to go through the same thing I did or that we did, right? There's always, and that's not like I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just natural, right? Improvement, advancement. And that's my part, and that's our role. Um, and so yeah, those are kind of my thoughts thus far, about finishing this program, and maybe that it kind of addresses what you were talking about, Noah. Like, how do I build stronger relationships or with other folks? Maybe it's through this. I've been reading more about other professors throughout the country who are implementing technology into their classrooms, and this professor does a podcast. This professor does a podcast for every class she teaches every week. And I was like, dude, that's a phenomenal idea. And I would take it a step further. I was like, I would have student participation in that. Or like sometimes no professor, it's the student who is creating a podcast to go over that week's information. I was like, shit, man, you know how much more information I think I would like that experience, right? That experience is,
Yep.
oh man, like I was pumped, and like for a second I was pissed. I was like, I'm salty, but like, damn, that's a great idea. Like, what the fuck? I mean, yeah. So I think that, yeah, it's just about improving the program, because I do think, regardless of how much, there's room for improvement, and no matter um, how many moments there have been where I've been frustrated. Uh, I think there is something really unique about our program, and I think I've heard that uh, with other, in my conversations with other MSWs and former MSWs, like, there is definitely at the heart, I think there's something really special about being able to have these conversations openly, and there is room for change. I do believe that. I think there is room for change. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I just want to see improvement, and
Yeah, I agree. All my critique is out of love and appreciation.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, no.
that's where we're all at.
Yeah. I mean, that is why I came to this program a second time, because I did my undergrad here. Is that SF State's a really unique place, and I think it has a lot of untapped potential that really comes from the bottom up, from the students
Mm-hmm.
up to the faculty, and I think we're an example of it.
Yeah, I said it before, man. I think that I think there's like a remarkable amount of talent within our cohort, and I'll make I don't like to assume, but I would say probably in the first years as well. Right, I haven't had the opportunity to speak in depth with them, which is something I would like to do more of. I'd love to see some more collaborative work with second years and first years. But I do like that there was a step taken where you do have classes with first years, so that's something really positive. But yeah, there's so much potential. There's a lot of smart people, and not smart and like book smart, but like there's some like really talented people who have like voices and who are creative, and yeah, yeah. I think. Damn, no, we boring you?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Golly, leave
No, it's your red light special over there.
My right, you like that, right? You like this, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna have to do. I think I'm gonna have to do a another podcast at night so I can get its effect.
Get the full effect. Of
Yeah,
course.
yeah. All right. Well, I think I'm gonna go get a haircut, even though there's no barbershops open.
Are you sure you want that on record?
Right? Oh, I just said I'm gonna go get a haircut. I said there's no barbershops open, so we can leave it at that.
I'm gonna have breakfast.
Breakfast. What the hell? Breakfast for dinner, breakfast for lunch.
Breakfast for breakfast, man. I'm starving.
That's I feel you. Cool. Well, I guess until we speak again.
Yeah.
Thanks for
What's your
Until
timeline out
next
there,
time.
Joe?
my timeline. Let's see. I am scheduled to leave. I had to change my travel plans because I had to look on the U.S. travel advisory, and my original plan was to the Dominican Republic first, and it is down. I think they're at a level 4 out of 5. And that's not just with COVID, but tourism. There's been a lot of, I guess there's been some reports of violent crimes, which is nothing really new because it's always going down. Like that's a part of, I feel like that's real. But I was like, all right, maybe, something, again, that gut feeling. I was like, okay, well, what's next? So it's looking like February 1st, I'm going to go to Jamaica, and I'll be, February 1st, I'll leave for Jamaica, probably be there in like 2 months.
Hey.
I just sent some exploratory emails to professors that are down there at the University of the West Indies, and then another university that's in there that has a social work program, so I can maybe participate in one of their classes or some type of learning experience. I mean, this is a really unique opportunity to travel, but this isn't vacation. You know what I mean? Like, still got class, still got work, still an internship. And yeah, why not learn from, why not have that opportunity, that experiential opportunity in Jamaica. And then from there, we'll see where the world is. You know what I mean? Like, I have no idea. Well, but for sure, I'm going to be there for 2 months. But until then, I'll be in the mountains of Virginia. Where all this social work, all this social work started.
Yeah, right. Out there with the coal miners.
That's West Virginia. I was saying the slaves. I was getting,
oh my God.
I was getting to the root of our issue that our country was founded in slavery and.
Right. Do we need to unpack that, Noah?
No, that's Noah went to coal miners.
You said the mountains.
Yes, I recognize the mountains.
And Sandy, are you guys doing major Christmas things?
No, not really. I mean, we might have like a small Christmas dinner with like just our immediate family, so like the people that live here, but nothing too crazy. We've canceled everything, kind of, slowed down just because of the spread, and everyone in my family is pretty like high risk anyway, so yeah, I'm just looking to chill and figure out like what I want to do for this next like week and a half of just chilling.
Well, go buy something nice for yourself, because just imagine that your wallet was magically found, because if it hadn't been, you wouldn't have that money. Yeah.
Right. As a gift for finding the wallet that I lost.
Mm-hmm.
No, how was your Hanukkah this year? Did you celebrate in style or what?
Hanukkah was cool. We lit lights a few nights. Forgot a few nights. But nothing. We didn't do gifts, but it was sweet. We did like prayers each time we lit the lights, which we hadn't really done before, so that felt cool. It felt like, and I ordered, y'all know La Cocina?
Oh, there you go.
Oh, nice.
So the La Cocina is this amazing. It's like a what do you call those things
Nonprofit.
that help startups grow?
An incubator.
Incubator. It's an incubator for food businesses that are generally ran and owned by women of color.
Mm-hmm.
And so they put together a Hanukkah box with like food from all of their different restaurants and companies.
Okay.
And so I ordered one of those, and it was hella bomb. And so it was fun to like eat real Hanukkah food and light the lights. It was like very familial, which was cool.
Dope.
Nice.
Yep.
All right. Well, yeah. Until next time, I'm gonna try. Yeah, figure out how to incorporate other folks into this. I don't know if that's me reaching out, or maybe I post this in the Facebook.
Yep.
And,
Yeah, why not?
yeah, and
Link them to the episode. Fuck it.
Get a little sign up sheet.
get a little sign up sheet going. No, you want to take the lead on that?
We can tag team it.
Damn, no. All right, y'all. I'll holler at you.
All right.
All right.
Patriarchy out.
Take care, y'all.